For most of Earth's history, life did not live on land. It lived in the sea, and the sea was nothing like the one we know today. The earliest oceans were not calm blue expanses filled with balance and rhythm. They were vast, open, and exposed, stretching without shelter in every direction. Fossils reveal waters crowded with creatures larger, tougher, and more aggressive than anything alive now, animals shaped by constant pressure rather than peace. Survival here was not guided by intelligence or cooperation, but by the ability to endure a world that never relaxed its grip. Many prehistoric marine animals evolved traits that feel excessive through modern eyes. Massive jaws built to crush, endless rows of teeth that replace themselves without pause, bodies layered in armor, not for dominance, but for survival. These features did not arise randomly. They were responses to an environment that demanded strength simply to remain alive. Entire lineages rose within these waters and vanished just as quietly, never once touching land. Extinction in the sea was frequent and unannounced, not a catastrophe but a pattern. Even animals that ruled their ecosystems for millions of years eventually faded, leaving only fragments pressed into stone. The ocean did not reward balance, it rewarded whatever worked, no matter how brutal or temporary. The deeper scientists study ancient oceans, the more unforgiving they appear. But what kind of world forces life to become like this? Tonight, we are traveling back to Earth's first and longest chapter, a time when the sea shaped every rule life would ever learn. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight and what time is it there. It's always a joy to see how far these sleepy stories drift across the world. And if these gentle journeys bring you peace, a like or subscribe helps others find their way here too. Now, let your breath slow, let your body settle, and together let us descend into the ancient seas. Long before shorelines mattered, before forests had a place to root, or animals had reason to lift their weight into open air, the planet belonged almost entirely to water, not just in coverage, but in influence. The surface may have hinted at land here and there, scattered edges and rising stone, yet life did not follow those hints. It remained suspended, adrift, immersed in a world where motion was never optional and stillness was rare. The ocean was not simply where life lived, it was the system that decided how life worked. In those early ages, land existed more as an interruption than a destination. Bare rock endured heat, cold, radiation, and violent chemical swings without mercy. There were no soils to soften it, no complex air to shield it. Whatever touched those surfaces did not stay long. Survival required consistency, and the only place where conditions held steady enough for life to experiment was beneath the surface of the sea. There, the temperature shifted slowly, chemistry mixed thoroughly, time moved at a gentler pace. Water did not remove danger, but it softened extremes just enough for life to persist. The ocean became the planet's great equalizer. Heat from the sun dispersed through vast volumes of moving water. Gases dissolved, reacted, and circulated. Nutrients drifted rather than pooled. Nothing stayed isolated for long. A chemical change in one region did not remain local. It spread, diluted, and reshaped distant environments. Life growing in one basin was quietly connected to processes unfolding far beyond its sight. The sea linked everything, not through intention, but through motion. Because of this, evolution did not unfold in pockets. It unfolded as a continuous conversation between chemistry, movement, and chance. Bodies formed knowing they would always be surrounded. There was no above or below in the way land would later define it, only gradients of light, pressure, and food. Every adjustment mattered. A slightly denser tissue changed buoyancy. A small change in surface texture altered how water moved across skin. Even breathing, which would later become rhythmic and visible, remained invisible here, happening through membranes, surfaces, and dissolved exchanges. These conditions shaped the earliest rules of survival. Movement was not about reaching destinations, but about staying suspended. Strength was not measured by how much weight a body could carry, but by how efficiently it resisted drift or embraced it. Growth did not mean towering upward, it meant spreading outward, thickening, or elongating into the currents. The sea rewarded bodies that fit its flow, not those that fought it. Over time, this environment became a quiet sculptor of complexity. Structures that failed were erased without ceremony. Forms that worked persisted, subtly refined by countless small pressures acting all at once. There was no single direction guiding change. Instead, evolution unfolded as a series of compromises between stability and flexibility, between exposure and concealment, between energy gained and energy lost. These balances were not chosen, they were inherited by whatever survived long enough to pass them on. Climate itself answered to the sea. The movement of water regulated warmth and cold long before air could. Shifts in ocean chemistry altered what life could build and how it could function. Changes in circulation rearranged entire living regions without any visible boundary. To exist was to remain sensitive to forces far larger than any individual body, forces that did not respond to strength or awareness. Every rule that later governed life on land began here, shaped by immersion. The logic of growth, the cost of size, the trade between speed and endurance, even the earliest forms of cooperation and conflict, all emerged underwater. When life eventually reached shallower edges and dared to touch exposed stone, it did not arrive as something new. It arrived carrying ancient solutions, forged in salt and darkness, refined by pressure and patience. This is why the earliest chapters of life feel so different from what came later. The ocean did not favor intention or planning, it favored persistence within motion. It trained life to respond rather than anticipate, to endure rather than dominate. Long before claws, limbs, or voices, there was water shaping every decision a body could make, and even as land slowly became more welcoming, the foundations were already set. Life would always carry the memory of this beginning, written into tissues, metabolisms, and instincts. The sea was the first world not because it was welcoming, but because it was unavoidable. It offered no escape from its influence, only endless opportunity to adapt within it. As life continued to explore the possibilities offered by water, bodies began to change in a quiet but unmistakable direction. Shapes lengthened, mass increased, forms that once drifted lightly started to carry weight, not as a burden, but as an advantage. In the ocean, gravity still existed, but it spoke more softly. Water wrapped itself around every surface, lifting, supporting, slowing the fall that would have crushed similar bodies on land. What could not yet stand upright could still grow outward, thicker and longer, suspended in a moving cradle. This gentle resistance changed the meaning of size. On land, weight would eventually demand bones, joints, and strength just to remain upright. In the sea, mass spread itself evenly, shared across buoyancy and motion. A larger body did not immediately mean fragility, it meant stability. Currents pushed less easily against something broad and heavy. Sudden changes in movement felt muted. The ocean rewarded scale by making it easier to remain where you were. As bodies grew, the world around them subtly shifted. Small organisms experienced the sea as a place of constant threat from every direction. Larger forms experienced it differently. Predators still existed, but fewer of them could attempt an attack. Mouths struggled to close around thicker tissues. Limbs failed to find leverage. What once hunted widely now chose carefully. Size narrowed the list of dangers, not by eliminating them, but by making attack costly. Growth also changed how animals moved through the water. Momentum carried larger bodies farther. Each slow movement displaced more fluid, creating quiet zones of pressure that signaled presence long before contact. Smaller creatures reacted by fleeing, hiding, or flattening themselves against the sea floor. Larger ones moved with less urgency. They could afford patience. Energy, once spent on constant escape, could now be invested elsewhere into digestion, reproduction, or further growth. This shift did not happen all at once. It unfolded across countless generations, each one pushing slightly past the limits of the last. A thicker shell here, a broader torso there. Muscles arranged not for speed alone, but for control. Over time, these changes compounded. Size stopped being a side effect of survival and became one of its primary strategies. With scale came presence. Large bodies altered their surroundings simply by existing. They stirred sediments, reshaped feeding grounds, and influenced where others could safely travel. Smaller life learned to recognize these moving forms as boundaries as much as threats. Entire regions of the sea became defined by who occupied them, not through intention, but through mass and reach. The relationship between size and power deepened as oceans grew more crowded. Once many animals shared the same waters, being large offered something else: priority. Access to food arrived earlier. Scarce resources tilted toward bodies that could claim them without constant challenge. Even without aggression, presence alone discouraged competition. In a world where energy was never guaranteed, this advantage mattered deeply, yet size demanded its own compromises. Growing larger required more food, more time, and more stable conditions. But in the ocean, these costs were partially absorbed by the environment itself. Nutrients drifted, carcasses sank slowly, feeding whoever arrived first. Water carried scent and vibration across vast distances, guiding large bodies toward opportunity. Being big did not eliminate hunger, but it made finding food less uncertain. As this pattern repeated, the sea began to host creatures that would later feel impossible by land standards. Lengths stretched far beyond familiar scales, jaws widened, bodies thickened until they no longer felt temporary. These forms did not rush, they did not need to. Their presence alone reshaped interactions around them. Size became more than a physical trait, it became influence. Power in the ocean did not always require speed or cleverness. Often it required endurance, reach, and the quiet confidence that comes from being difficult to move, difficult to harm, and difficult to ignore. Water allowed this by softening the penalties of mass and turning gravity into a manageable force rather than an absolute barrier. This is how the sea quietly rewrote expectations. It made room for bodies that land would never have tolerated. It allowed life to test the upper edges of form, to explore what happens when weight stops being a limitation and starts becoming a shield. In doing so, it set the stage for oceans filled with giants, not as exceptions, but as outcomes of the rules, water gently enforced. For a time that feels long only in hindsight, the ocean carried life without open conflict. Bodies absorbed light, filtered drifting particles, and borrowed energy from chemistry and sunlit water. Movement existed, but it was not yet organized around pursuit. The sea was active, crowded, and alive, yet much of it unfolded without intent. Then, almost quietly, that changed. The shift did not announce itself with a single moment or a dramatic newcomer. It emerged gradually, through small advantages that accumulated until they could no longer be ignored. One organism discovered that another body contained concentrated energy, already processed, already assembled. Feeding no longer required waiting for nutrients to drift close or light to reach the right depth. It required proximity and contact. With that realization, the meaning of life in the ocean transformed. Once animals began eating other animals, survival stopped being only about enduring the environment. It became about enduring each other. Energy moved faster through the system, passed directly from body to body. Growth accelerated. Death became more personal, more immediate. The sea, once shaped mainly by chemistry and motion, began to reorganize itself around interaction. Predation did not replace earlier ways of feeding, it layered itself on top of them. Filter feeders continued their quiet work, photosynthetic life still captured light. But now, woven through these steady processes, was a new rhythm of pursuit and escape. Bodies adapted not only to water, pressure, and chemistry, but to watching, sensing, and reacting. This altered the structure of every food chain. No position remained neutral. To exist was to risk becoming food. Even large bodies, once relatively insulated by size, had to account for teeth, hooks, grasping limbs, and sudden bursts of motion. Every adaptation gained importance because failure was no longer abstract. It arrived in the form of another living creature. The presence of predators changed how prey occupied space. Open water became dangerous. Stillness took on new meaning. Some creatures pressed themselves against the seafloor, blending with sediment and shadow. Others learned to drift at depths where light faded, trusting darkness more than speed. Movement grew more deliberate. Visibility became a liability as much as an advantage. Predators, in turn, were shaped by these responses. Chasing was costly. Missed attempts wasted precious energy. Over time, many hunters learned that waiting could be more effective than pursuit. The ocean encouraged patience, a body that could remain still, conserving strength while sensing vibrations and chemical traces, often succeeded where constant motion failed. Predation began to favor strategy as much as power. As this exchange repeated, ecosystems grew more tightly connected. The success of one species directly influenced the survival of many others. When predators increased, prey shifted behavior, population sizes changed, and food availability rippled outward. Nothing existed in isolation. Every adaptation sent consequences through the water. This was the moment the sea lost any remaining simplicity. Balance did not disappear, but it became dynamic and fragile, constantly adjusting to changes in behavior and form. Stability no longer meant stillness. It meant continuous response. The ocean learned to exist in motion not just physically, but biologically. Importantly, predation did not make the sea more chaotic. It made it more structured. Relationships hardened, roles emerged. Some animals specialized in feeding on very specific prey. Others developed broad diets, taking whatever chance delivered. These choices shaped bodies in subtle ways, influencing mouthparts, sensory organs, and internal rhythms. Evolution gained new paths to explore, not randomly, but guided by interaction. The emotional tone of life also shifted, though emotion itself as humans understand it did not yet exist. There was, however, a new constant presence of risk. Life unfolded under pressure that came not only from the environment, but from neighbors. This pressure rewarded awareness, responsiveness, and efficiency. Those qualities carried forward, refined and inherited long after the original interactions faded. As ages passed, predation became woven so deeply into marine life that it felt inevitable. New species emerged, already shaped by its logic, born into systems where being eaten was as natural as feeding. Entire communities formed around these exchanges, dense and active, layered by depth, movement, and timing. From this point onward, the sea could never return to what it once was. The introduction of animal eating created feedback that reshaped everything that followed. Size, armor, speed, patience, and perception all gained new meaning in its presence. Every future adaptation would be tested not only against the water itself, but against other living bodies sharing it. The ocean continued its slow circulation, its steady mixing of heat and chemistry, but beneath that familiar motion, a quieter transformation had locked into place. Life had begun to feed directly on life, and in doing so, it set the tempo for a world where survival would always be measured in encounters as much as in endurance. As predation became woven into the fabric of the sea, size began to sort life in new and unforgiving ways. The water that once allowed small bodies to move freely now offered fewer places to vanish. Open space turned dangerous, and for the smallest animals, danger came from every direction at once. Above, below, and from the sides, movement carried meaning. Even gentle currents could betray a presence. The sea remained vast, yet for those without mass or protection, it began to feel crowded. Small bodies experienced the ocean differently than larger ones. They were light enough to be carried far by moving water, but that same lightness stripped them of control. Drifting exposed them to unfamiliar regions, shifting temperatures, and new hunters. Each movement risked attention. Transparency helped, but light bent and shimmered, turning even invisible forms into faint signals. In a world now tuned to notice life, being noticeable for even a moment could be enough. Speed offered limited safety. Many small animals could move quickly, but escape demanded constant effort. Energy vanished as fast as it was gained. A single failed attempt at evasion could end a lineage that had taken countless generations to form. The ocean did not pause for second chances. Selection worked quietly, allowing only those strategies that functioned reliably to persist. Because of this pressure, survival for small life shifted away from confrontation. Instead of outrunning threats, many species learned to avoid them entirely. Bodies flattened, colors dulled. Movement slowed until it blended with the background rhythm of water. Some animals pressed themselves into crevices or beneath sediment, turning the seafloor into a patchwork of hiding places. Others embraced the currents completely, surrendering control and drifting with plankton and debris, becoming part of the moving texture of the sea. This drifting was not passive. It required precise balance. To float at the right depth, to rise or sink slowly without effort, demanded subtle adjustments in shape and density. A body too heavy would fall into danger below. A body too light would be carried into exposed light. These margins were narrow, and success depended on remaining within them continuously. Survival became a matter of tuning rather than strength. For those unable to hide or drift effectively, the consequences were severe. Small animals that remained exposed faced constant pressure with little defense. Predators did not need to specialize to take advantage of them. Almost anything could eat them. Their role in the ecosystem was essential, yet fragile. Losses were frequent and often unnoticed. Extinction did not arrive as an event. It arrived as absence. This disappearance shaped future life as much as survival did. Each failed strategy removed a pathway evolution might have explored. What remained were forms that could either disappear visually, vanish into motion, or reproduce fast enough to offset constant loss. Reproduction, for many, became less about ensuring survival of the individual and more about ensuring continuity of the line. Lives grew shorter, but more numerous. Chance replaced longevity as the guiding force. In this environment, being small demanded constant negotiation with danger. Even feeding carried risk. Pausing to filter particles or graze on surfaces exposed bodies to passing jaws and sweeping limbs. Many learned to feed in short bursts, retreating quickly afterward. Others synchronized activity with darkness or depth, using time itself as shelter. The ocean offered no safe size, but it was less forgiving to those who could not reshape themselves around its threats. Over generations, this pressure refined entire communities. Regions became dominated by either large forms that discouraged attack or small ones perfected in avoidance. The middle ground narrowed. Animals either committed to becoming hard to kill or hard to find. Those that failed to make this choice rarely left descendants. Yet even in this narrowing, life did not stop diversifying. Within the limits imposed, variation flourished. Subtle changes in shape, behavior, and timing produced new ways to persist. The sea did not eliminate small life. It demanded precision from it. Survival no longer depended on strength or dominance, but on fitting into the moving gaps between danger. As the ages passed, the lesson repeated endlessly. Smallness itself was not fatal, but exposure was. Every successful small creature became a study in concealment, patience, or prolific renewal. The ocean continued to circulate, indifferent to which strategy prevailed. But its pressures ensured that being small without adaptation became a temporary state, quickly erased, leaving behind only those who learned how to disappear without leaving the sea at all. As small bodies learned to vanish and large ones learned to dominate space, another path quietly took form in the sea. Some creatures did not run, drift, or disappear. They stayed where they were and began to change their surfaces instead. Skin thickened, soft outlines sharpened, minerals dissolved in seawater were drawn inward and shaped into plates, ridges, and shells. Protection moved from behavior to structure. This transformation did not require intention. It emerged wherever a slightly harder exterior allowed a body to survive an encounter that would have ended another. Those individuals endured longer, fed more often, and left behind descendants that carried the same trait forward. Over time, these subtle advantages accumulated until the seafloor and open waters alike held animals that felt different to the touch, heavy and resistant, wrapped in borrowed stone. Shells formed like quiet fortresses. Curved surfaces distributed pressure, deflecting bites that might otherwise penetrate flesh. Spikes rose outward, turning contact into cost for any predator reaching too close. Hard exteriors made bodies less flexible, slower to move, and more expensive to build, but they offered something rare in an increasingly dangerous world. They offered a moment of hesitation. For a while, this was enough. Predators passed over prey they could not easily consume. Energy favored easier targets. Armored creatures lingered, feeding calmly while danger moved elsewhere. The ocean seemed to reward stillness and defense. Entire communities of hard-shelled life spread across ancient seas, shaping habitats with their presence. Sediments shifted around them. Other animals learned to live among their forms, using shells as shelter and surface. Yet the sea does not remain quiet for long. Each success reshapes the pressures around it. As armored life became more common, predators adapted in response. What could not be swallowed whole was approached differently. Mouths grew stronger, muscles rearranged, feeding behaviors shifted from tearing to crushing. The ocean began to test defense with force. The first arms race unfolded without awareness or strategy, guided only by survival. Hard shells selected for harder attacks. Thicker armor favored stronger jaws. Small increases on either side escalated rapidly. What had once been protection became a challenge. A shell that resisted one generation of predators failed against the next. Spikes that discouraged soft mouths became manageable obstacles to stronger ones. This exchange pushed evolution along narrower paths. Armor demanded resources. Minerals had to be collected and shaped. Bodies devoted energy to maintenance rather than growth or reproduction. In return, predators specialized. Some focused on breaking shells, others learned to pry, crack, or wear down defenses over time. Feeding became a matter of technique as much as strength. As these interactions deepened, the environment itself responded. Broken shells accumulated on the seafloor, altering chemistry and texture. New hiding places emerged among fragments. Calcium cycled differently through the water, influencing what other life could build. Defense and offense rippled outward, affecting organisms that were not directly involved. Importantly, defense never created safety. It only delayed risk. Predators did not stop hunting because prey grew harder. They adapted their tools. The moment armor became widespread, it lost its advantage. Those unable to improve or change vanished quietly. The fossil record preserves this pattern in layers of shells that appear, flourish, and then fade, replaced by new forms built on similar ideas but refined through fresh pressures. This was the ocean learning to respond to resistance. No adaptation existed in isolation. Every solution shaped the problems that followed. Shells offered survival. Briefly, they also invited innovation aimed at breaking them. The balance constantly shifted, never settling for long. In this process, the sea became a place of escalation. The cost of survival increased for everyone. Prey invested more in protection. Predators invested more in force and precision. Energy flowed faster through bodies and ecosystems alike. Nothing remained simple. Yet life persisted, experimenting relentlessly within the boundaries set by water and interaction. The first arms race did not end. It transformed and expanded, carried forward into countless later encounters. Armor and attack became themes that echoed through time, resurfacing whenever pressure demanded them. The ocean did not favor defense or offense. It favored response. Each adaptation was temporary, measured not in success, but in how long it delayed the next challenge. And so the sea continued to shape life through quiet competition, turning surfaces into battlegrounds and bodies into living records of encounters. As armored bodies spread through ancient seas, the ocean answered in kind, not with chaos, but with refinement. Defense had bought time, not peace. Shells and hardened plates changed the shape of survival, and in response, mouths began to change as well. What emerged was not simply a stronger bite, but a new way of interacting with food. Jaws became instruments of pressure, shaped not for tearing flesh, but for breaking what once resisted. The fossil record preserves this shift with quiet clarity. Teeth appear thicker, blunter, closer together. Jaw joints grow broader and more stable. Muscles attach in places that suggest slow force rather than quick snap. These were not mouths designed for chase or display. They were built to endure strain, to press steadily until resistance failed. Armor no longer guaranteed protection. It invited testing. This change altered feeding from an act of capture into an act of processing. Teeth ceased to function primarily as blades. They became surfaces, edges, and crushing points. Some forms resembled rounded stones set into bone, others flattened into plates that met with deliberate alignment. Each closure of the jaw transferred immense pressure through small contact areas, exploiting weaknesses in shells that no predator before could manage. Once this ability appeared, it spread rapidly. Any predator capable of breaking armor gained access to a resource others could not use. Entire populations of shelled animals, once buffered by their defenses, became exposed. Survival no longer depended solely on being hard. It depended on being hard enough, at the right thickness, in the right places. Those who fell short vanished gradually, leaving behind layers of broken fragments. The rise of crushing jaws reshaped behavior across the sea. Armored animals altered movement patterns, avoiding regions where such predators were common. Some grew thicker shells, investing even more energy into defense. Others reduced armor altogether, returning to concealment and mobility instead. The arms race did not end. It shifted into new forms, each response carrying its own cost. For predators, crushing required patience. Delivering sustained force demanded stability and time. These hunters could not strike quickly and retreat. They had to secure their prey, position it carefully, and apply pressure without interruption. This favored bodies built for control rather than speed. Limbs, fins, and mouth parts coordinated into slow, deliberate movements. Feeding became quieter, but no less decisive. As this strategy spread, safety evaporated across the seafloor. Shells that once offered refuge now attracted attention. Every contact held risk. Even thick armor could fail if positioned poorly or worn thin by repeated stress. The sea entered an era where protection offered no absolute guarantee. Predators learned not only how to break defenses, but how to identify weakness, targeting edges, joints, and thin growth lines. This development also altered the structure of ecosystems. Crushing predators reduced the dominance of heavily armored species, allowing other forms to re-emerge. Diversity shifted, not through elimination, but through redistribution. Food webs reorganized themselves around new flows of energy. What had once been inaccessible became common. Feeding relationships grew tighter and more complex. Teeth, in this context, became more than weapons. They were tools shaped by use. Wear patterns in fossils show surfaces ground smooth by repeated contact with hard material. Breakage and replacement became part of life. Teeth had to endure constant stress, and evolution responded by refining their form and placement. Function mattered more than sharpness. Reliability mattered more than spectacle. The rise of crushing jaws marked a turning point in marine survival. Defense could no longer rely on passive strength alone. Every layer of protection demanded equal innovation in attack. The ocean continued to reward efficiency, not fairness. It did not favor predator or prey. It favored adaptation that worked within the pressure of reality. As ages passed, this strategy echoed forward, influencing later forms that would never meet these early seas. The logic of crushing, of overcoming resistance through steady force, became embedded in the evolutionary toolkit. It reappeared whenever armor returned across different lineages and eras, always carrying the same message. Once crushing evolved, the ocean closed another door to safety. What remained was motion, adaptation, and constant negotiation between form and force. Life continued, refined by pressure, shaped by encounters that left marks not only on bodies, but on the long memory of evolution itself. Once crushing jaws reshaped the balance of survival, mouths entered a new phase of strain. Eating was no longer a brief act followed by rest. It became labor, repeated again and again, against resistance that did not yield easily. Shells, bone, and hard surfaces pushed back with every bite. Teeth met pressure, scraped against minerals, and absorbed force that traveled deep into the jaw. Damage was no longer occasional, it was constant. In this environment, teeth wore down quickly. Edges dulled, tips fractured, surfaces flattened. A tooth that failed was not a minor inconvenience. It was the difference between eating and starving. Yet the ocean did not pause to allow recovery. Food drifted, swam, and sank regardless of readiness. Missed opportunities accumulated, and weakness showed quickly. Evolution responded not by making teeth indestructible, but by making them temporary. Instead of perfecting a single set, life invested in renewal. New teeth formed beneath old ones, waiting quietly until needed. When damage occurred, replacement followed. This process unfolded again and again, generation after generation, until replacement became not a feature, but a foundation of feeding itself. This change altered the rhythm of life. Feeding no longer centered on preserving tools. Teeth could be used aggressively, without caution, because loss was expected. A broken tooth was not failure. It was part of use. Jaws closed with confidence, knowing that wear carried consequence, but not permanence. The presence of endless replacement freed predators to exploit harder and more demanding prey. Shells could be crushed, bone could be worked down. No single feeding event threatened long-term survival. Instead, animals fed whenever opportunity arose, often and efficiently. Eating became continuous, woven into daily movement rather than reserved for rare moments. This system also influenced how jaws were built. Teeth no longer needed to last a lifetime. They needed to function well enough, long enough, before giving way. Shape mattered more than durability. Position mattered more than polish. Rows of teeth ensured that even when one failed, others could take its place immediately. Feeding remained uninterrupted. The sea adapted to this rhythm seamlessly. Broken teeth scattered across sediments, joining shells and bone fragments. Minerals returned to circulation. Nothing was wasted. Even the failure of a tool fed back into the system that would build the next one. Replacement also allowed specialization to deepen. Some teeth grew flat and heavy, suited for grinding. Others sharpened into points for gripping. Because replacement was assured, variation carried less risk. A design that worked briefly was still useful. A tooth that failed quickly could be replaced by one shaped slightly differently. Small adjustments accumulated across time, refining function through repetition. For prey, this change removed another layer of safety. Even if armor dulled a predator's bite, it only delayed the next one. Grinding wear weakened shells steadily. There was no waiting out an attack until teeth gave up. They did not. They returned. This constant feeding pressure transformed ecosystems further. Predators could eat more frequently and in greater amounts. Energy flowed faster through bodies. Growth accelerated. Reproduction followed. Food webs tightened, becoming more active and more demanding. The sea grew dense with motion, its calm surface concealing endless cycles of consumption beneath. Endless replacement also reshaped lifespan and risk. Animals could afford to feed even under dangerous conditions because efficiency outweighed caution. Missing a meal carried greater cost than a lost tooth. As a result, behavior shifted. Predators moved confidently through environments filled with abrasive prey and resistant materials. Their bodies absorbed the cost and repaired it quietly. Over time, this strategy became so effective that it spread widely. Entire lineages came to rely on continuous renewal rather than preservation. Teeth ceased to be permanent structures. They became renewable tools, cycled endlessly as long as the body endured. This approach echoed far beyond the early seas. Later animals, even those that would leave water behind, inherited the logic of replacement. Though expressed differently, the principle remained the same. When tools face constant damage, renewal offers resilience that strength alone cannot. As the ocean continued to circulate, carrying nutrients, fragments, and life itself, feeding settled into a new cadence. There was no clear beginning or end to eating. It unfolded as part of movement, part of presence. Teeth broke, teeth returned, and through that quiet cycle, life learned how to keep going in a world that demanded constant contact with resistance. In the long, ancient oceans, survival began to depend on something subtle and quietly powerful. Long before limbs touched land or lungs tasted air, life in the sea started learning how to notice. Shapes in the water mattered. Shifts in shadow mattered. Movement, once invisible, slowly became something that could be sensed before it arrived. In these early marine worlds, seeing first meant living longer, not through strength or speed, but through awareness. At first, vision did not resemble what we think of as eyes. It began as a sensitivity to light, a faint ability to distinguish brightness from darkness. For creatures drifting near the surface, light carried information. It hinted at open water or shelter, at safety or exposure. Even this simplest awareness offered an advantage. Those that could sense light reacted sooner, drifting away from danger or adjusting their position before harm reached them. Over generations, this sensitivity sharpened, becoming more precise and more directional. As predators grew larger and more capable, detection turned into survival. The ocean was no longer a place where danger announced itself through contact. Threats approached silently, carried by currents, hidden behind reflections and distortion. Eyes began to form shapes, lenses, and layers. Vision allowed animals to spot movement at a distance, to recognize outlines against shifting backgrounds, and to respond before a chase began. In this quiet escalation, seeing first often meant escaping entirely, leaving no struggle behind. For hunters, vision transformed the sea into a landscape rather than a blur. Being able to see prey before sensing it through touch or vibration meant less wasted energy and fewer failed attempts. Predators with better eyesight could choose when to strike, conserving strength and reducing risk. Over time, this selected for eyes capable of detecting contrast, depth, and motion with increasing clarity. The ocean, once an endless blue-green expanse, slowly filled with edges, shapes, and opportunities. Yet light does not reach everywhere. As life pushed deeper, darkness reshaped vision once again. In dim waters, eyes grew larger, gathering every possible trace of illumination. Some creatures developed sensitivity to subtle glows, catching the faint shimmer of bioluminescence drifting through the dark. Others refined their ability to detect movement rather than detail, responding to changes in light where no clear images existed. In these depths, vision did not disappear, it adapted, becoming specialized for scarcity. Darkness also encouraged cooperation between senses. Vision blended with touch, pressure detection, and chemical awareness. Eyes no longer worked alone, but as part of a wider system tuned to survival in low light. In this way, the ocean did not divide life into seeing and blind forms, It shaped a spectrum where vision bent and stretched to meet the environment rather than resisting it. Over immense spans of time, eyes evolved independently in many lineages, each shaped by similar pressures but different paths. This repeated emergence reveals how valuable vision became in marine ecosystems. It was not luxury or decoration, it was time gained, moments spared, and decisions made before impact. In a world where reaction speed often determined survival, seeing offered a quiet buffer against sudden death. Even today, the oceans carry this legacy. From surface hunters tracking silhouettes above them to deep sea animals reading the smallest flicker of light, vision remains woven into survival strategies first written hundreds of millions of years ago. The sea rewarded those who noticed early, reacted gently, and avoided chaos altogether. In these ancient waters, life learned that survival was not always about being stronger, but about knowing what was coming and slipping away before it arrived. Movement once seemed like the obvious answer in the ancient seas. As predators grew larger and prey grew more alert, speed appeared to promise control. Faster swimmers could close distance quickly. Quick escapes could turn danger into distance. For a time, the ocean filled with bodies shaped for motion, streamlined forms built to surge forward in powerful bursts, yet the water itself imposed limits. Every sudden chase demanded energy, oxygen, and recovery. Over long stretches of time, speed revealed its cost. Chasing wasted energy in an environment where energy was never guaranteed. A failed pursuit meant more than disappointment. It meant precious reserves burned away with nothing gained in return. Even successful hunts carried risk. Long chases attracted attention from other predators. Exhausted hunters became vulnerable hunters, their effort echoing through the water as heat, turbulence, and fatigue. Gradually, natural selection began favoring a quieter solution. As oceans grew more crowded and complex, ambush became more effective than pursuit. Waiting required patience, but patience consumed far less energy than constant motion. Creatures that learned to remain still could let the environment work for them. Currents carried prey closer. Shadows provided concealment. Reefs, seabeds, and floating debris became places of strategy rather than obstacles. Instead of racing after life, predators learned to let life come to them. This shift did not happen suddenly. It unfolded slowly, across generations, shaped by countless small advantages. Bodies changed. Muscles built for endurance replaced those meant for speed. Jaws grew stronger, allowing a single precise strike to replace repeated attempts. Camouflage patterns softened outlines, making still forms harder to detect. Even behavior adapted. Remaining motionless for long stretches became normal, a state not of rest but of readiness. Stillness also changed how prey survived. Animals learned that constant fleeing drained strength and attention. Those that moved carefully, conserving energy and responding only when necessary, lasted longer. Small adjustments in timing and awareness became as important as raw speed. In this way, the ocean rewarded restraint on both sides of the hunt. Movement became selective, purposeful, and rare. In darker waters, patience gained even greater power. Light was limited, visibility uncertain. Sudden motion revealed location more clearly than stillness ever could. Predators that waited could remain invisible until the final moment. Prey that drifted quietly blended into the background, reducing their presence rather than advertising it. The sea grew quieter, not empty, but controlled by those who understood when not to move. Ambush reshaped entire ecosystems. Instead of constant chases across open water, encounters became brief and decisive. One movement mattered more than many. Survival hinged on timing, position, and awareness rather than endurance. This created a slower rhythm beneath the waves, one defined by pauses and anticipation. The ocean did not become less dangerous. It became more calculated. Over time, stillness itself became lethal. Predators evolved the ability to hold position for extraordinary lengths, sometimes anchoring themselves, sometimes hovering so gently they appeared suspended in place. Their presence was felt only at the moment of contact. This efficiency allowed life to persist under constant pressure without burning itself out. Energy could be saved for growth, reproduction, and recovery rather than endless motion. The success of patience echoed across millions of years. Even as environments shifted and species rose and vanished, this strategy endured. The lesson was simple and quiet. In a world governed by limits, restraint often outperformed force. Speed promised quick results, but demanded constant payment. Patience asked for time, and the sea had time to give. As time settled deeper into the ancient oceans, balance began to tilt around a few dominant forms. These were not merely successful hunters moving through shared space. They were forces that defined space itself. Where they existed, the rules of survival shifted. Their presence reshaped entire regions of the sea, quietly deciding which lives could remain and which would fade away. The first true apex predators emerged not through speed alone or size alone, but through a combination of traits refined over long spans of pressure. They sensed earlier, struck more efficiently, and recovered faster than anything around them. Other predators avoided them instinctively, altering routes, depths, and hunting times. Prey species learned to live in fragments of habitat, clinging to margins where detection was harder and escape more likely. In this way, a single dominant animal could influence hundreds of lives without constant action. Its existence alone was enough. Control did not mean constant killing. In fact, these apex predators often hunted less frequently than smaller hunters. Their strength lay in selectivity. By removing certain individuals, they indirectly shaped populations beneath them. Weaker, slower, or less aware animals disappeared more often, while survivors carried traits that allowed them to persist under pressure. Over generations, this quiet filtering changed how entire species looked, moved, and behaved. The sea around these predators organized itself accordingly. Certain regions became stable only because a dominant presence prevented chaos. Smaller predators kept their numbers in check. Grazers avoided stripping environments bare. Energy flowed through the ecosystem in measured pathways rather than erupting into imbalance. Apex predators acted like anchors, heavy and unseen, holding the system steady through restraint as much as force. This structure remained fragile, though it appeared strong. When an apex predator vanished from a region, the change rippled outward. Without that controlling presence, mid-level predators expanded rapidly. Their increased hunting pressure overwhelmed prey populations that had never evolved defenses against such numbers. Seabeds changed as grazers vanished or multiplied unchecked. The water itself grew quieter or more chaotic, depending on which balance was lost. These collapses were not loud events. They unfolded gradually, often unnoticed until diversity thinned and familiar forms disappeared. The absence of a single species could unravel connections built over immense stretches of time. The ocean did not immediately replace what was lost. New balances took long ages to form, and many regions never returned to what they had been. What made these apex predators remarkable was not cruelty or dominance, but influence. They rarely needed to pursue control actively. Their position at the top allowed ecosystems to organize around them naturally. Movement patterns, breeding cycles, and even body shapes adapted in response to their presence. Life learned where to exist safely by learning where these animals were. As environments shifted and extinction events swept through different eras, apex predators were often among the most vulnerable. Their success relied on stability beneath them. When food webs collapsed, those at the top had nowhere to turn. Yet even in disappearance, their absence left a mark. Ecosystems carried the scars of imbalance long after the predators themselves were gone. Through these ancient dynamics, the ocean revealed a quiet truth. Survival was not only about individuals enduring harsh conditions, it was about systems holding together through influence rather than excess. Apex predators represented limits, boundaries drawn by life itself. Their presence allowed complexity to exist without tearing itself apart. In the slow, patient rhythm of the sea, control did not come from constant action, but from being enough to change everything without needing to move at all. Long after the ocean learned how to see, wait, and control itself through quiet dominance, it settled into a deeper reality that shaped nearly every living form. Hunger was not an emergency or a failure of the system. Hunger was the system. Food did not arrive evenly or reliably. It appeared in bursts, then vanished for long stretches, leaving life suspended in expectation rather than satisfaction. In these ancient seas, abundance was temporary. A bloom of life might pass through an area carried by currents or seasonal shifts, only to thin and disappear without warning. Scavenging opportunities followed sudden deaths, then faded just as quickly. For most creatures, eating was not a daily rhythm, but a rare event punctuating long intervals of restraint. Bodies evolved not around fullness, but around absence. Many animals went extended periods without feeding, and this was not a weakness, it was a requirement. Those that depended on frequent meals simply did not last. The ocean rewarded forms that could slow their metabolism, stretch their reserves, and remain functional even when nothing passed within reach. Fat deposits, slow digestion, and energy-conserving tissues became more valuable than raw power. Stillness returned here as well, not only as a hunting strategy, but as a way to endure. Movement during hunger was costly. Each unnecessary motion spent energy that might not be replaced for a long time. Creatures learned to drift, settle, or anchor themselves against the seafloor. Muscles adapted to hold position rather than surge forward. Internal systems grew efficient, recycling what they could, wasting very little. Even growth slowed, extending development across long spans rather than rushing toward size. Predators reflected this pattern as much as prey. A powerful bite meant little if it required constant feeding to sustain it. Apex hunters evolved to strike decisively, then withdraw into long recovery. Their bodies processed large meals slowly, extracting maximum value from every capture. In the time between hunts, they remained largely inactive, letting energy trickle rather than drain away. Smaller animals developed different efficiencies. Some filtered tiny particles continuously, but even this depended on currents delivering enough material. Others became specialists, feeding only when precise conditions aligned. Hunger shaped timing, patience, and opportunity across all levels of life. Eating was no longer a simple act. It became a calculated moment within a larger balance. This constant scarcity changed behavior in subtle ways. Competition was less frantic than expected because conflict itself burned energy. Avoidance often replaced confrontation. Sharing space, even with rivals, became preferable to fighting for territory that might soon offer nothing at all. In this quiet economy, wasting effort could be as deadly as missing a meal. Hunger also influenced reproduction. Producing offspring required resources that could not be guaranteed. Many species delayed reproduction until conditions allowed, while others produced fewer young with greater chances of survival. Timing mattered more than quantity. Life learned to wait, even here, folding patience into its most fundamental processes. Over immense spans of time, efficiency replaced strength as the most reliable advantage. A massive body without restraint collapsed under its own needs. A smaller form, capable of enduring emptiness, could persist through lean eras without change. This is why so many ancient creatures appear restrained rather than extravagant. Their designs reflect endurance rather than excess. The ocean, through hunger, imposed discipline. It shaped creatures that could live between meals without urgency or desperation. Hunger became background, not crisis. It informed every motion, every pause, every decision. In this steady absence, life learned a quiet truth. Survival did not belong to those who consumed the most, but to those who needed the least and knew how to wait until the sea finally offered something more. As life pressed farther from the surface, the ocean slowly withdrew its most familiar guide. Sunlight thinned first, then fractured, then vanished entirely. What began as a gentle dimming became a permanent absence. Below this boundary, the sea no longer followed the rhythms shaped by day and night. Time loosened, direction blurred. The rules that governed the upper waters no longer applied. Near the surface, light had once structured everything. It shaped movement, timing, and the growth of living forms. Below, those signals dissolved. Colors lost meaning. Vision softened or transformed. Bodies that relied on sight alone found themselves at a disadvantage, responding too slowly or misreading their surroundings. For some, adaptation followed. For others, disappearance came quietly. In these deeper regions, new rules replaced old ones. Instead of brightness, contrast mattered. Instead of speed, sensitivity took over. Life tuned itself to pressure, vibration, and chemical trace. The water carried information differently here. A shift in current, a faint disturbance, or a lingering scent could speak more clearly than any image. Animals that learned to read these signals gained access to a world hidden from surface-bound life. Food arrived unpredictably, often falling from above in fragments, sinking slowly through layers of water. This descent shaped behavior. Creatures learned to wait beneath invisible pathways where nourishment occasionally passed. Some followed the slow rain downward, others remained fixed, conserving energy while relying on rare abundance. Movement became deliberate, measured, and minimal. Bodies changed in response. Skeletons softened or shrank, tissues became flexible, able to withstand immense pressure without breaking. Some forms stretched longer, others flattened, each shape reflecting a solution to living where gravity pressed constantly and escape routes were limited. Growth slowed further, spreading across long spans of time rather than rushing toward size. In the absence of light, communication transformed. Bioluminescence emerged not as decoration, but as a tool. Soft glows marked boundaries, attracted prey, or warned rivals. In a world of darkness, even a small flicker carried power. These lights were used sparingly, brief pulses in vast blackness, revealing presence without lingering long enough to invite danger. Predation also shifted. Encounters were sudden and intimate, Without distant visibility, interactions happened at close range. This favored precision over pursuit. Jaws and grasping appendages became more refined. Once contact was made, there was little room for error. Energy spent chasing across empty water held no advantage here. Many lineages never made this transition. Traits that worked well near the surface failed in deeper zones. Dependence on constant light, frequent feeding, or rapid movement became liabilities. These forms vanished from lower depths, leaving behind environments shaped by those willing to change. Life below the light did not reward flexibility alone, but restraint and patience woven into every function. What survived was not a shadow of surface life, but a distinct expression of it. The deep ocean did not mirror the world above. It followed its own logic, slower and quieter, guided by scarcity and pressure rather than abundance. Over time, these zones became stable in their own way, hosting communities that rarely intersected with sunlit waters. In this layered world, disappearance was as natural as survival. Life adapted or faded without spectacle. The boundary between light and dark became one of the most powerful filters evolution ever created. Those that crossed it carried only what they needed, leaving behind excess, speed, and brightness. Below the light, existence narrowed, slowed, and endured, held together by adaptations that made darkness not an obstacle, but a home. As life descended farther into the ocean's depths, another quiet force began to shape everything it touched. Pressure increased steadily, layer by layer, without pause or drama. It did not arrive as a sudden threat. It accumulated, gently and relentlessly, until familiar designs began to fail. What had once worked near the surface no longer held together below. Rigid structures struggled first. Shells, thick bones, and stiff frames resisted the squeeze only to fracture, warp, or shatter. Strength that depended on hardness became a liability. Pressure pressed inward from every direction, finding weaknesses where water could not. Creatures built like armor learned that protection on land or near sunlight did not translate well into deeper water. Those forms grew scarce, then faded entirely from those zones. Soft bodies told a different story. Without fixed edges to resist compression, they gave way gently, distributing force instead of fighting it. Flesh that could bend and flow adapted more easily than structures that demanded shape. Muscles elongated, internal spaces reduced. Organs shifted position, settling into arrangements that could tolerate constant weight without collapse. These bodies appeared fragile, yet they endured where others failed. As depth increased, even familiar silhouettes vanished. Fish-like shapes flattened or stretched. Limbs shrank or disappeared. Faces simplified, losing features unnecessary for survival in darkness and pressure. What remained were forms shaped less by symmetry and more by function. The ocean did not preserve beauty as it was known above. It preserved only what continued to work. Pressure also slowed movement further. Quick turns and sudden bursts became difficult in dense water pressing against every action. Bodies adapted by reducing unnecessary motion. Fins broadened for balance rather than speed. Muscles emphasized control rather than force. Even breathing shifted, with structures designed to extract oxygen efficiently without creating large internal voids vulnerable to compression. Over time, life reorganized itself around these constraints. Soft tissues thickened in some areas and thinned in others, allowing pressure to pass through without damage. Fluids replaced air spaces. Skeletons, when present, became lighter and more flexible. Some species abandoned rigid support entirely, relying on the water itself to maintain shape. In these environments, the ocean became part of the body, not something separate from it. This transformation reshaped entire communities. Creatures that once dominated shallower regions could not follow prey downward. Niches opened for new forms that had never existed near the surface. Interactions changed. Predation became slower and more deliberate. Contact occurred at close range, where softness allowed both offense and survival. The deep sea became less about collision and more about persistence. Familiar forms did not migrate downward unchanged. They fragmented into variations, each adapted to narrower ranges of pressure. Some lineages stopped descending entirely, while others specialized further, surrendering traits that once defined them. Eyes reduced, bones softened, shapes drifted away from anything recognizable from above. These changes were not sudden, they unfolded gradually, generation by generation, until the resemblance to surface life was lost. What remained was not chaos, but coherence shaped by necessity. Pressure rewrote bodies in ways that appeared strange only when compared to shallower worlds. In context, these forms were precise responses to constant force. Nothing was excessive, nothing was ornamental. Every structure served endurance. As these deep zones stabilized, the ocean held layers of life separated not by distance, but by pressure. Each layer followed its own rules, shaped by forces that never rested. Rigid designs belonged to other places and other times. Here, softness endured. Familiar shapes dissolved into new expressions of survival, quiet and steady, held together by the simple ability to yield where yielding meant lasting. As the deep ocean settled into its slow, pressurized rhythm, food took on a different meaning. Hunting was no longer the main promise of survival. Instead, life learned to wait for what fell. In a world where energy was scarce and movement costly, death itself became nourishment, drifting downward through layers of water until it reached the waiting dark. Dead animals fed entire ecosystems. When a large body sank from above, it carried with it a sudden concentration of energy unlike anything else in the depths. The descent was gradual, a slow turning as it passed through colder, heavier water. Long before it reached the seafloor, traces of it spread outward, faint signals carried by currents. These signals traveled farther than sight ever could, announcing opportunity to creatures that had learned how to wait. Around these falls, life gathered quietly. Some arrived quickly, guided by chemical traces and subtle disturbances. Others emerged slowly from hiding, conserving energy until certainty replaced hope. No one arrived in haste. In these places, speed was unnecessary. What mattered was timing and endurance. A single fallen body could sustain entire communities for long stretches, not through abundance, but through careful use. Carcasses became rare opportunities rather than routine meals. They appeared without warning and disappeared just as unpredictably. When they came, they rewrote the local environment. Soft tissues fed scavengers and predators alike. Bones became shelter, surface, and long-term resource, hosting organisms that could draw nourishment from what remained long after flesh was gone. Even after visible matter faded, traces lingered, nourishing life invisible to the eye. Missing one of these events carried consequences. In the deep ocean, there were no backups, no alternative hunting grounds close by. Creatures specialized for this mode of living depended on such falls to survive and reproduce. To arrive too late meant wasting energy. To leave too early meant missing the final stages that mattered most. Those that failed to align their lives with these rhythms did not persist. Adaptation followed patience. Bodies evolved to detect distant signals. Metabolism slowed, stretching what little energy was available between opportunities. Some animals remained dormant for long periods, conserving strength until something fell within reach. Others stayed near pathways where descent was more likely, positioning themselves not through choice, but through generations shaped by chance and survival. The community around a carcass followed a sequence rather than a scramble. Early arrivals fed quickly, then withdrew. Others followed, feeding on what remained. Smaller forms appeared later, drawing value from fragments and residue. This order reduced conflict and conserved energy. Even here, restraint governed survival. Wastefulness carried a price no one could afford. Over time, entire ecosystems came to depend on this quiet reign of death. They did not need constant input, only occasional abundance spaced across long intervals. This pattern shaped reproduction, growth, and behavior. Life learned not to hurry. It learned to persist between moments rather than seek them out. There was no drama in this system, only continuity. Death above became stability below. The surface world moved with seasons and light, while the deep waited patiently, receiving what drifted down. This connection bound distant layers of the ocean together, linking lives that would never meet. In these depths, eating whatever fell was not a sign of desperation, it was a refined strategy shaped by time. Survival belonged to those who could endure the waiting, recognize opportunity, and use it fully without excess. Missing, one could mean extinction, not through sudden violence, but through quiet absence. The deep ocean did not forgive waste or impatience. It rewarded those who understood that even in darkness, life arrived eventually, falling softly through the water, carrying enough to last until the next descent. As life continued adapting to scarcity, pressure, and distance, reproduction changed quietly alongside survival. In the deep ocean, bringing new life into the world rarely involved care or guidance. The environment itself dictated a different strategy, one shaped not by protection but by probability. Reproduction became a numbers game, not through excess but through necessity. Care was rare because care required energy, time, and stability. In a world where food arrived unpredictably and survival depended on patience, devoting resources to guarding or nurturing offspring often cost more than it returned. Many creatures released their young into the water and moved on, not through indifference, but through limits imposed by the environment. The ocean did not provide safe places to linger. It demanded continuation without attachment. Offspring entered a world already filled with danger and silence. They drifted into currents that offered no direction, only movement. There were no shelters designed for the young, no pauses in pressure or hunger to ease their beginning. Most were never seen again. This was not failure, but expectation. Life did not aim for certainty. It aimed for persistence across time. Most offspring never survived long enough to grow. They were carried into regions unsuited for their bodies or encountered predators before finding nourishment. Some settled into depths they could not endure. Others exhausted their reserves before discovering a place where food might arrive. Survival was rare, but rarity was enough. Only a few needed to persist for a lineage to continue. This approach favored quantity over investment. Eggs and larvae were produced in vast numbers, each one carrying a small possibility forward. The ocean filtered relentlessly, removing those mismatched to the moment. What remained were not necessarily the strongest or fastest, but those aligned with conditions by chance and timing. Survival relied on coincidence woven into biology. Over generations, This strategy shaped forms that matured quickly when possible and reproduced without delay. Waiting too long risked missing brief windows of opportunity. When conditions allowed, reproduction happened swiftly, sometimes only once. Life did not assume tomorrow would resemble today. It responded to what existed in the moment. This system also encouraged diversity. With so many offspring and so little control over outcome, variation flourished. Small differences determined whether a young creature drifted into safety or danger. Over time, this constant testing refined populations, not toward perfection, but toward compatibility with unpredictability. The ocean became both nursery and judge, shaping life without preference. Some species evolved slight exceptions. A few protected eggs briefly or chose locations where survival odds improved. Even then, care remained minimal and short-lived. The cost of extended protection rarely balanced the benefit. The environment changed too often, and waiting too long invited loss. This numbers-based approach echoed through every layer of deep ocean life. It influenced size, lifespan, and behavior. Creatures that lived longer reproduced less frequently, still releasing offspring into uncertainty. Short-lived forms reproduced rapidly, trusting repetition rather than endurance. In both cases, success depended on alignment with chance rather than control. There was a quiet acceptance within this system. Life did not struggle against loss, it moved forward through it. The disappearance of most offspring was woven into the continuation of the few. Reproduction did not promise legacy, it offered possibility. In this way, the deep ocean revealed a different meaning of survival. It was not about safeguarding every beginning, but about allowing many beginnings and trusting time to preserve what fit. Care was replaced by volume, intention replaced by timing. Survival relied on chance, guided gently by adaptation, carried forward by the slow, steady patience of the sea. The ocean did not always threaten life through predators, darkness, or hunger. At times, it changed more quietly, turning inward through shifts that could not be seen or sensed until they were already widespread. Chemistry, once a steady background, began to drift. Elements moved out of balance. Water that had long supported life slowly became harder to breathe within. These chemical shifts unfolded gradually, spreading through layers of the sea like an unseen tide. Oxygen thinned in certain regions, not all at once, but in patches that grew and connected over time. In these waters, life struggled to extract what it needed to survive. Breathing became effortful. Activity slowed. Creatures that depended on constant oxygen intake found themselves trapped in environments that no longer sustained them. Oxygen-poor waters spread without drama. There were no sudden crashes, no violent upheavals. Instead, entire regions entered a state of quiet decline. Animals lingered longer than expected, conserving energy and reducing movement, as if waiting for conditions to recover. Some migrated slowly, drifting toward boundaries where water still carried breath. Others could not move far enough or fast enough and remained where chemistry had shifted against them. In these zones, the sea grew quieter, not empty, but altered. The usual patterns of interaction dissolved. Predators avoided areas where effort outweighed reward. Prey slowed, conserving what little strength remained. Reproduction faltered as bodies redirected energy toward basic survival. Even microbes responded, changing how nutrients moved through the system. The ocean did not collapse instantly. It dimmed. Entire regions died silently, not all at once and not completely, but enough to leave lasting gaps. Seafloors, once marked by motion, became still. The slow rain of food from above continued, but fewer organisms were able to use it. What arrived often passed through unchanged, settling into sediments rather than sustaining life. Death here was not loud or sudden, it was a prolonged absence of renewal. Some life forms endured by adapting to the new conditions. Bodies adjusted to extract oxygen more efficiently. Metabolisms slowed further. Others relied on chemical processes that did not require oxygen at all, inhabiting niches that opened as more sensitive organisms vanished. These survivors did not replace what was lost. They reshaped the ecosystem into something simpler and quieter. The spread of these low oxygen zones influenced areas far beyond their boundaries. Migrating species altered routes, increasing pressure elsewhere. Food webs thinned as connections broke. The sea became uneven, a patchwork of livable and hostile regions that shifted slowly over time. Stability became local rather than global, dependent on currents, depth, and chemistry rather than geography alone. Through all of this, the ocean remained calm on the surface. Light still flickered above. Waves continued their rhythm. The changes below were hidden, unfolding over spans too long for sudden notice. By the time recovery began in some regions, others had already passed beyond renewal. New equilibria formed, not as restorations, but as revisions. These moments revealed how fragile balance truly was. Life could endure hunger, pressure, and darkness, but when the water itself changed, endurance had limits. The ocean turned against itself not through intention, but through slow shifts that altered what life depended on most. In this quiet transformation, the sea taught another lesson. Survival was not guaranteed by strength or patience alone, but by alignment with conditions that could change without warning, leaving entire worlds to fade in silence. Extinction did not arrive in the oceans as a single, shattering moment. It moved slowly, quietly, woven into the long rhythm of life itself. Species appeared, flourished for a time, then diminished as conditions shifted beyond their tolerance. This pattern repeated again and again, not as an interruption of Earth's story, but as one of its most consistent features. Marine extinctions happened repeatedly across deep time, often without clear boundaries. There was rarely a sharp line between before and after. Instead, populations thinned, ranges narrowed. Once common forms became rare, then absent. The sea did not mark these moments with violence. It absorbed them, allowing empty spaces to settle where life had once moved. Loss was gradual and constant. Even in periods of relative stability, disappearance never stopped completely. Environmental pressures shifted slowly, sometimes too subtly to notice within a single lifetime. Temperature drifted, chemistry changed, currents altered familiar pathways. Each small change removed a little more support from species finely tuned to older conditions. What remained was not devastation, but quiet attrition. This steady loss shaped the oceans more deeply than sudden catastrophe ever could. Ecosystems did not collapse all at once. They thinned, simplified, and restructured themselves as connections weakened. Food webs lost strands gradually, becoming less complex but still functional. The sea learned how to continue with fewer participants, adjusting its balance rather than breaking it. Recovery, when it came, required time measured in millions of years. New species did not appear quickly to fill every absence. Evolution moved patiently, testing forms through countless generations. Empty niches persisted long enough to reshape the direction of adaptation itself. Life that emerged after loss was not a restoration of what had vanished. It was something different, shaped by the conditions that remained. During these long recoveries, The ocean existed in a state of quiet experimentation. Surviving lineages expanded cautiously. New relationships formed slowly. Stability returned not through abundance, but through compatibility. The rebuilt ecosystems often supported fewer species, but those that persisted fit more securely within altered conditions. Extinction also played a role in limiting excess. When certain traits became too widespread or too specialized, changing conditions removed them. This prevented ecosystems from becoming rigid. Loss created flexibility over long spans, allowing life to shift direction rather than remain trapped in outdated designs. In this way, disappearance and innovation remained connected. There was no single moment when extinction was complete, and no clear moment when recovery finished. The ocean moved continuously through these phases, overlapping them across regions and depths. Some areas declined, while others stabilized. Some recovered, while others continued to lose complexity. The planet did not synchronize these events. It allowed them to unfold independently, guided by local conditions. Seen from this distance, extinction was not a disaster in the human sense. It was a pattern embedded in the way life interacted with a changing world. It carried no intention, no finality. It simply marked the places where balance shifted beyond what certain forms could endure. Life persisted not because it avoided extinction, but because it absorbed it. Each loss reshaped what followed, narrowing possibilities in some directions while opening others. The ocean did not remember what it had lost. It responded to what remained. Across immense stretches of time, this cycle continued. Appearance, spread, decline, and absence followed one another without pause. Recovery followed loss slowly and imperfectly, never returning to the same arrangement. The sea carried forward a living history written not only in survival, but in disappearance. In that quiet continuity, extinction was not an ending, but part of the long, patient motion that allowed life to keep changing, adapting, and enduring. The greatest losses in Earth's history did not begin on land. They began quietly beneath the surface, where the ocean carried the first weight of change. Long before forests thinned or skies emptied, marine life faced the most severe tests of survival the planet would ever impose. These moments were not singular events, but periods when many pressures aligned, pushing the sea beyond its ability to adjust gradually. The largest mass extinctions struck oceans first, because the ocean absorbed change immediately. Shifts in temperature, chemistry, and circulation moved through water faster than through air or rock. What entered the sea spread widely, carried by currents into places untouched by surface chaos. Life that had endured slow variation for millions of years suddenly found familiar conditions slipping away at a pace too fast to follow. During these intervals, entire branches of life thinned rapidly. Species that once filled reefs, seafloors, and open water vanished from one layer after another. Some disappeared because oxygen declined beyond tolerance, others because acidity dissolved the structures they relied on. Food chains fractured as foundational organisms collapsed. Predators followed prey into absence. The losses compounded quietly. In the most severe of these die-offs, up to 90% of marine species vanished. This number represents not a moment of destruction, but the cumulative result of many failures unfolding together. The sea did not empty overnight. It lost complexity step by step, shedding diversity until only scattered survivors remained. What persisted did so by coincidence, resilience, or simple alignment with newly emerging conditions. Reefs fell silent. Once crowded waters became sparse. The slow rain of organic matter continued to fall through the depths, but fewer organisms remained to intercept it. Some regions became dominated by microbial life, while larger forms retreated or disappeared entirely. The ocean did not cease functioning, but it functioned differently, stripped down to simpler systems. These resets were not equal across all depths or regions. Some pockets endured while others collapsed completely. Survivors clustered where conditions remained just within tolerance, forming the seeds of future ecosystems. From these remnants, life would rebuild, but only after long spans of time during which the sea existed in a diminished state. Recovery did not restore what was lost, it created something new. The organisms that reoccupied emptied niches were shaped by the lessons of collapse. They often favored flexibility over specialization, efficiency over extravagance. Ecosystems that emerged afterward were initially simpler, with fewer interdependencies, less variety, and broader tolerances. Complexity returned slowly, layer by layer, as stability allowed. Each major die-off reset the trajectory of evolution. Dominant groups vanished, opening space for forms that had once lived in the margins. This reshuffling altered the direction of life for millions of years afterward. The ocean did not return to its previous condition. It carried forward a revised version of itself. What makes these events difficult to comprehend is their scale combined with their quiet nature. There were no witnesses, no singular moments of collapse. Life faded across generations, unnoticed by anything capable of recording it. The sea remained, waves continued, chemistry adjusted, and time passed. Only much later would recovery begin to restore density, though never the same arrangement. Through these cycles, the ocean demonstrated both vulnerability and persistence. It could be pushed to the edge of habitability, yet it did not remain empty. Even after the worst losses, life returned, reshaped and redirected. The sea reset again, not as an act of renewal, but as a consequence of pressure exceeding balance. These ancient die-offs stand as reminders written into stone and sediment. They reveal how deeply the ocean responds to change and how strongly it influences the fate of life on Earth. Loss did not end the story. It redirected it, guiding evolution through absence as much as through survival, carrying the planet forward into unfamiliar chapters shaped by what remained. Dominance in the ancient oceans often looked absolute while it lasted. Certain forms spread widely, filled niches efficiently, and appeared perfectly suited to their time. Their presence shaped ecosystems, redirected energy, and defined what survival looked like for everything around them. Yet beneath this appearance of control, a quiet instability was always forming. Specialization made dominance possible, but it also planted its limits. Species that rose to prominence often did so by refining a narrow set of traits. Some became expert hunters of a particular prey. Others thrived only within specific temperature ranges, chemical balances, or depths. These refinements allowed them to outperform competitors under stable conditions. Efficiency replaced flexibility, and success followed. For a time, this focus worked. Populations expanded, ranges widened. Evolution reinforced the very traits that made these organisms dominant. Redundant abilities faded because they were no longer needed. The ocean rewarded precision, and precision reshaped bodies, behaviors, and life cycles. What was unnecessary disappeared. Change punished success, not through cruelty, but through inevitability. Conditions never held perfectly still. Currents shifted, chemistry drifted, temperatures rose or fell over long spans. When these changes occurred, specialists found fewer options available to them. Traits that had once defined strength offered little help under new circumstances. Adaptation required traits that had already been lost. As environments changed, dominance began to erode quietly. Declines were often subtle at first. Reproductive rates dipped, juveniles survived less often, geographic ranges narrowed. Other organisms, once kept in check, began to spread into vacated spaces. The ocean did not announce this transition, it allowed it to unfold gently. No ruler lasted forever, because no set of conditions lasted forever. The same forces that allowed dominance to emerge eventually undermined it. Systems that had become finely tuned lost resilience. When disruption arrived, even slowly, these systems bent less easily than those built around broader tolerance. What had once been an advantage became a constraint. This pattern repeated across eras and depths. Dominant predators faded, reef builders vanished, filter feeders declined. Each loss opened space for new forms that had survived quietly in the background. These replacements rarely resembled what came before. They carried different strategies, different shapes, and different limits. Dominance shifted rather than disappeared. The ocean never sought balance through permanence. It favored motion through time. Life advanced by exploring possibilities, not by maintaining empires. When one form occupied too much of the system, it reduced diversity and adaptability around it. Change restored variation by removing those most dependent on stability. Extinction was not always required for dominance to end. Sometimes, a species survived in smaller numbers, retreating to regions where conditions still matched its needs. Other times, it persisted only in altered form, its descendants carrying fragments of past success reshaped for new contexts. Decline did not always mean disappearance, but it always meant transformation. Over immense spans, this cycle created a layered history of rulers that once seemed permanent. Their influence remained in the structures of ecosystems, in the paths evolution took afterward, and in the opportunities their absence created. Yet their time at the center passed, just as others would later pass. The sea did not remember dominance as a goal. It treated it as a temporary state arising from alignment between life and environment. When alignment broke, dominance faded without ceremony. What endured was not rule, but continuity. Life adjusted, redistributed, and continued, guided by change rather than mastery. In this slow unfolding, the ocean revealed one of its deepest truths. Power was always conditional. Success invited fragility. Survival belonged not to those who ruled longest, but to those who could step aside, adapt quietly, and persist when the world shifted beyond recognition. The sea did not release life all at once. The movement toward land began quietly, not as a bold expansion, but as a subtle withdrawal from pressure. In certain shallow regions, the water grew warmer and lighter. Sunlight lingered longer. The crushing weight of depth eased. Here, the ocean loosened its grip just enough to allow something new to happen. Shallow water offered relief in ways that went beyond comfort. Pressure lessened, making movement easier and bodies less strained. Oxygen mixed more readily with the water, making breathing less costly. Temperature changed more gradually, creating pockets of stability that did not exist farther down. In these margins between sea and surface, life found space to experiment without constant threat from the extremes below. Predators were fewer in these zones, not because danger vanished, but because the sea's most efficient hunters rarely ventured so close to light and turbulence. Waves disrupted ambush, tides rearranged terrain. Visibility changed constantly. Large apex predators built for depth, darkness, or pressure found these environments unreliable. Smaller hunters filled some of the gap, but the intensity of predation softened. These shallows became places of pause. Life lingered there longer, feeding, resting, and reproducing in relative calm. Bodies adapted subtly at first. Fins stiffened slightly, able to press against firm surfaces. Sensory systems adjusted to airbrushing close above the waterline. Muscles learned to bear brief moments of partial weight as tides shifted. None of this was an intention to leave the sea, only a response to conditions that made lingering possible. Over time, the shoreline itself became familiar rather than foreign. Pools left behind by retreating tides trapped organisms temporarily, forcing them to endure moments with reduced water. Those that survived these intervals did so through small advantages: thicker skin, slower metabolism, or the ability to absorb oxygen more efficiently. Each survival extended the boundary of what was possible. Land, at first, offered little. It was harsh, dry, and exposed. Yet it also lacked many of the dangers that defined the sea. There were fewer large predators waiting beyond sight. Movement, though difficult, did not carry the same constant threat. The ground did not chase, it waited. For creatures used to relentless pressure, even this challenge represented a different kind of risk, one that could be managed. Leaving the sea was not an act of conquest, it was an act of avoidance. Each step, each shift toward firmer ground, reduced exposure to the pressures that dominated the deeper ocean. It offered escape from suffocation, from crushing weight, from environments where chemistry could turn hostile without warning. Land became a refuge by comparison, not because it was safe, but because it was simpler. These early movements were brief and hesitant. Life returned to the water often, retreating when conditions became too severe. Yet each return carried changes shaped by time spent near land. Lungs and lung-like structures improved. Limbs strengthened. Skin thickened. What began as survival at the margins gradually reshaped entire bodies. The escape toward land did not happen everywhere at once. It unfolded along scattered coastlines, estuaries, and deltas where conditions aligned just enough. Each successful transition added another thread to the future tapestry of life. Failure remained common, but success needed only a few pathways to continue. In this quiet transition, the boundary between sea and land became porous. Life did not abandon the ocean. It extended itself carefully, testing a new direction while still anchored to old ways. Leaving the sea became survival not through ambition, but through restraint and necessity. The shoreline did not announce a new age, it simply allowed one to begin. In the calm shallows, beneath shifting skies and gentle tides, life found its first lasting relief. What followed would reshape the planet, but it began here, softly, as the sea loosened its hold and allowed some of its children to step away, not in triumph, but in search of a quieter place to endure. Life did not step onto land as something entirely new. It arrived carrying a long memory shaped by water, pressure, and patience. The sea did not loosen its influence when bodies crossed the shoreline. Instead, it followed quietly, woven into the structures, instincts, and senses that life carried ashore. Teeth and jaws tell part of this story. Long before land offered plants to chew or prey to seize, mouths had already learned precision beneath the waves. Biting, tearing, grinding, and filtering were perfected in water where feeding demanded efficiency. These tools crossed the boundary unchanged in purpose, only redirected toward new materials. The first bites taken on land echoed movements refined through millions of years of marine survival. Senses followed the same path. Vision shaped by murky water adapted to air, retaining sensitivity to movement and contrast. Smell, once carried through liquid currents, shifted into a new medium without losing its role in detection and awareness. Hearing, rooted in vibration rather than sound, retained its connection to subtle shifts in the environment. Even balance, once guided by currents and pressure, continued to anchor bodies as gravity replaced buoyancy. Marine evolution shaped land animals at a structural level. The arrangement of bones, the way joints moved, and how muscles pulled against one another reflected patterns established in swimming ancestors. Limbs did not emerge from nothing. They reshaped fins that already knew how to push, stabilize, and steer. Each step on land was built upon motions once used to hold position in moving water. Breathing systems carried the ocean within them as well. Lungs evolved from structures that managed gas exchange where oxygen was unpredictable. The rhythm of breathing reflected long familiarity with scarcity and variation. Even blood chemistry, the way oxygen bound and released, bore the imprint of ancient seas where survival depended on efficiency rather than abundance. Behavior also crossed over quietly. Patience honed through ambush and waiting did not disappear on land. Energy conservation remained essential. Hunger, unpredictability, and risk still shaped daily survival. The sea had taught life when to move and when to remain still. Those lessons persisted in forests, wetlands, and open ground long after waves faded behind. Reproduction retained ocean patterns too. Large numbers of offspring, limited care, and reliance on timing continued in many lineages. Though some new strategies emerged on land, the underlying acceptance of loss and chance remained familiar. Life did not forget how fragile beginnings could be. Even the shape of ecosystems reflected marine roots. Food webs organized around energy flow rather than dominance alone. Apex predators, once rulers of reefs and open water, found parallel roles on land. Their influence structured environments just as it had beneath the surface, though expressed through different forms and movements. The sea never let go because life never fully left it behind. Salt still moved through bodies, water remained essential within cells. The chemistry that once balanced survival under pressure continued to govern function in air. Oceans shaped not just ancestry, but every living moment that followed. As forests spread and plains opened, echoes of the sea remained present in how animals fed, sensed, moved, and endured. Each heartbeat followed rhythms set long before land was habitable. Each muscle contraction carried memory of resistance once felt in water. This continuity did not limit life, it guided it. The sea provided a framework strong enough to support transformation without collapse. By carrying its influence ashore, life avoided starting from nothing. It built forward using what had already proven reliable. In this way, the ocean's influence became permanent, not as a place, but as a process. Life carried the sea within itself, adapting its lessons to new environments while honoring their origin. Even far from the shore, beneath open skies and changing seasons, the quiet inheritance of the ocean remained present, steady and enduring, guiding life long after waves were out of sight. The ocean of today carries the weight of a long memory. It has passed through eras of scarcity, suffocation, collapse, and rebuilding. Compared to those ancient chapters, the modern sea appears gentler, more forgiving, its dangers softened by time. This sense of safety did not arrive suddenly. It emerged gradually as conditions settled into a narrower range, allowing life to persist without constant upheaval. Chemistry stabilized first. Over immense spans, the balance between gases, minerals, and temperature shifted toward consistency. Oxygen became more reliably available through much of the ocean, no longer retreating as often into vast, uninhabitable zones. Acidity fluctuated less dramatically. Nutrients circulated in patterns that repeated rather than fractured. This steadiness allowed complex ecosystems to hold together for longer stretches, giving life time to specialize without immediate penalty. With stability came predictability. Currents followed familiar paths. Seasonal rhythms returned again and again, shaping migration, breeding, and growth. Organisms could rely on these patterns rather than endure constant disruption. Energy flowed more smoothly from surface to depth, supporting food webs that extended through many layers of water. The ocean did not become abundant everywhere, but it became dependable enough to sustain continuity. Many pressures eased alongside this chemical calm. Extreme shifts that once suffocated entire regions became rarer. Mass die-offs no longer arrived as frequently or as broadly. The sea still changed, but its changes slowed. Life adapted to pace rather than shock. Bodies no longer needed to prepare constantly for collapse. This allowed longer lifespans, greater diversity, and more intricate relationships between species. Predation also softened in its intensity. While danger remained present, it became more structured. Apex predators existed within systems that limited excess rather than amplifying it. Prey species evolved defenses that did not require constant flight or concealment. Survival became less about enduring relentless pressure and more about fitting into established roles. The ocean felt calmer not because it lacked threat, but because threat became familiar. This calmer state shaped perception as much as reality. To modern eyes, the sea appears welcoming in many places. Coral reefs shimmer with life. Open waters support vast migrations. Even the deep, though still harsh, no longer mirrors the near emptiness left after ancient collapses. Recovery, given enough time, filled spaces that had once remained vacant for ages. Yet not all pressures vanished. The ocean still holds reminders of its past. Deep zones remain dark, cold, and unforgiving. Hunger continues to shape survival beyond sight. Pressure still limits where bodies can exist. Chemical balance, though steadier, remains sensitive. Shifts still ripple outward when thresholds are crossed. Some dangers simply became less visible. Toxic blooms still appear. Oxygen can still thin in certain regions. Currents can change course, redirecting life and energy in subtle but significant ways. The sea may feel safer, but it has not forgotten how to change. What truly separates today's ocean from its ancient predecessors is time spent without collapse. Long intervals of relative calm allowed ecosystems to deepen rather than reset. Complexity layered upon itself. Redundancy spread. When disruptions occurred, systems absorbed them without unraveling entirely. This resilience created the impression of security. The ocean learned balance not as a fixed state, but as a range. As long as conditions stayed within that range, life thrived. When pushed beyond it, consequences still followed. The difference now lies in frequency and scale, not in possibility. The modern sea remains a place shaped by endurance. Its apparent safety reflects lessons learned through loss repeated many times. It is quieter than before, but not passive. It still responds to change, still adjusts, still removes what no longer fits. Stability does not mean permanence. In this way, today's ocean feels safer because it stands on the far side of immense upheaval. It carries scars smoothed by time and systems refined through persistence. Many pressures eased, but not all. Beneath the surface, the long story continues, calm for now, shaped by balance that remains delicate, patient, and alive. Long after the most dangerous chapters of the ocean's history passed, many of its oldest strategies never disappeared. They did not need to. In the deepest and quietest places, conditions remain close enough to ancient worlds that the past still works. Here, evolution did not rush forward. It lingered, carrying forward designs shaped when survival demanded restraint above all else. Deep sea animals retain old strategies because the deep never asks them to change. Darkness still dominates, food still arrives unpredictably, pressure still presses evenly from every direction. In this environment, speed offers little advantage, and excess carries cost. The traits that once defined survival in primeval oceans remain effective where the sea has changed least. Slow movement persists as one of these traits. Many deep-dwelling animals drift, hover, or crawl rather than chase. Muscles are built for endurance instead of bursts. Energy is spent carefully, almost reluctantly, measured against long stretches of hunger. This pacing mirrors ancient seas, where movement itself was risk. Remaining still conserves strength and reduces notice, allowing life to persist between rare opportunities. Patience follows naturally. Waiting is not inactivity here, but strategy. Some animals remain motionless for hours or days, sensing faint disturbances carried through water. Time stretches differently in these depths. There is no urgency imposed by light or season. The rhythm is slower, shaped by descent rather than cycles. This patience echoes early oceans where survival depended on enduring far longer than it depended on acting. Massive mouths remain another ancient inheritance. In environments where meals are rare and unpredictable, the ability to consume whatever arrives matters more than precision. Wide jaws, expandable stomachs, and flexible skulls allow deep sea animals to take advantage of sudden opportunity without hesitation. Size, in this context, is not dominance. It is insurance against scarcity. These mouths reflect a time when missing a single feeding opportunity could end a lineage. That pressure never fully lifted in the deep. Even today, food may fall from above only a handful of times within an animal's lifetime. Being ready for excess when it appears remains essential. Other strategies persist quietly as well. Reduced skeletons, soft tissues, and minimal ornamentation reflect ancient lessons learned under pressure. Sensory systems favor vibration, chemical trace, and subtle movement over vision. Reproduction still relies on numbers rather than care. Growth remains slow, stretched across long spans. All of these traits connect directly to conditions once common throughout the ocean, now isolated to its depths. Evolution remembers because forgetting is unnecessary when the environment still rewards memory. Natural selection does not favor novelty for its own sake. It preserves what continues to work. In the deep ocean, the past never became obsolete. It simply became less visible. These living relics are not stagnant or unfinished. They are refined survivors, shaped by uninterrupted pressure rather than rapid change. Their forms appear strange only when compared to surface life that adapted to stability and abundance. In context, they are precise expressions of endurance. Even beyond the deep sea, traces of these ancient strategies appear. Some surface predators still rely on ambush rather than pursuit. Many animals conserve energy through stillness and timing rather than speed. Wide jaws and flexible feeding remain common wherever food is unpredictable. These echoes reveal how deeply early oceans shaped life's foundations. Evolution does not erase its own work lightly. When a solution endures across hundreds of millions of years, it becomes part of life's structure rather than a temporary adaptation. Ancient oceans tested these strategies relentlessly. Those that failed vanished. Those that worked became permanent options, available whenever conditions demanded them again. In this way, the modern world carries living memories of ancient seas, not as fossils or impressions in rock, but as moving, breathing beings still shaped by darkness, scarcity, and patience. The deep ocean remains a place where time feels layered, where the distance between past and present narrows. Evolution remembers, not through intention, but through survival, where conditions repeat, solutions return. And so, far below the surface, life continues to move slowly, wait patiently, and open wide, carrying forward a story written when the ocean was young, dangerous, and very much alive. Long before humans learned to name the ocean's depths, something older settled quietly into the body. It was not taught or inherited through stories. It arrived through sensation, carried by limits that could be felt even without experience. The deep presses against awareness in a way few environments do, not through motion or sound, but through absence. Darkness shapes this response first. On land, darkness arrives gradually. It can be interrupted by fire, by moonlight, by memory of familiar shapes. In the deep ocean, darkness is complete and indifferent. Light does not return with patience. It does not wait beyond the horizon. It simply ends. Human senses, evolved to track movement and contrast within air, find no anchor there. Vision offers nothing to hold on to, and without vision, the body feels unfinished, unbalanced, uncertain. Pressure deepens that sensation. Even imagining weight pressing evenly from every direction creates unease. The human body relies on empty spaces, on lungs filling and releasing, on bones that resist gravity rather than compression. The deep reverses these expectations. It does not pull downward, it presses inward. This difference is subtle but profound. It reminds the body that it was not built for such conditions, that familiar support systems fail quietly beyond a certain point. Isolation follows naturally. The deep ocean removes reference, scale, and direction all at once. There are no landmarks to mark progress, no horizon to measure distance. Sound travels differently, distorted and delayed. Movement loses meaning without feedback. For humans, whose survival once depended on reading environments quickly and sharing signals with others, this isolation strips away reassurance. Sensory deprivation intensifies everything. The mind expects input. When it does not arrive, imagination fills the gaps. In environments where information is scarce, the brain works harder, scanning for patterns that never appear. This effort creates tension rather than understanding. The deep ocean offers very little sensory return, and what it offers arrives without context, a vibration without source, a sound without direction, a presence without shape. These reactions are not failures of courage, they are acknowledgments of limits. Human perception evolved within narrow ranges of pressure, light, and gravity. Beyond those ranges, intuition no longer guides action reliably. Familiar tools lose meaning. Even technology, when imagined in such spaces, feels fragile, surrounded by forces it only temporarily resists. Our limits are exposed, not because the deep is aggressive, but because it is indifferent. It does not respond to effort or emotion. It does not adjust to presence. This neutrality unsettles a species accustomed to environments that react visibly to movement and sound. On land, footsteps matter. In the deep, they dissolve. The fear does not come from monsters or danger alone. It comes from a recognition that control fades quickly. In the deep, survival depends entirely on systems outside the body. Without constant support, existence ends quietly. This dependency contrasts sharply with environments where breathing, movement, and orientation require little thought. There is also memory woven into this response. For most of human history, the ocean represented boundary rather than habitat. Shorelines offered resources and danger in equal measure. Beyond them lay an environment that could not be negotiated for long. This long familiarity with limitation shaped instinct more than experience ever could. The deep ocean also mirrors earlier chapters of life's story, when survival demanded patience and restraint rather than dominance. Humans, shaped by speed, coordination, and social response, feel out of place there. The deep reveals how recent and specific our adaptations are. Yet, within this fear lies quiet clarity. It shows where the human body ends and the environment begins. It reminds us that not all places were meant to be entered, only understood. The deep ocean does not threaten identity, it simply ignores it. This instinctive response is not weakness, it is alignment with reality. Darkness, pressure, and isolation reveal truths that daylight and land allow us to forget. Our senses evolved for a narrow world, and beyond it, humility arrives naturally. In this way, the fear of the deep is not about danger alone, it is about exposure, about standing at the edge of what the body can interpret. The ocean's depths do not chase or confront. They remain still and vast, holding space where human certainty fades and ancient conditions quietly persist, unchanged by our presence. The record of the ocean's past feels vast when viewed through stone, yet it is deeply incomplete. What fossils offer is not a full memory, but a narrow window shaped by chance and preservation. Most of what once lived never hardened into bone or shell, never left an imprint strong enough to survive the turning of ages. The ocean carried far more life than it ever recorded. Soft-bodied life vanished without record. Creatures made of delicate tissue, thin membranes, and flexible forms dissolved quickly after death. Currents scattered them. Scavengers erased them. Bacteria reclaimed them without ceremony. In shallow water and deep alike, these bodies left almost nothing behind. Their absence from stone does not mean they were rare. It means they were fragile in a world that rarely preserves fragility. These soft forms likely dominated many ancient oceans. They drifted, filtered, glowed, and pulsed through water long before shells and skeletons became common. They shaped food webs, influenced chemistry, and filled ecological roles now occupied by harder creatures. When they disappeared, they did so completely, leaving no silhouettes pressed into rock. Their history survives only indirectly, inferred through gaps and patterns rather than evidence. Most ancient oceans left no trace because the sea is an active eraser. Seafloors shift, sediments churn, plates move, entire basins sink and rise again. Even when bodies reach the bottom intact, conditions rarely favor preservation. Oxygen, pressure, and microbial life work together to recycle matter quickly. Time compounds this process, grinding layers into dust, then folding them deep within the planet. What remains visible today represents rare moments when conditions aligned perfectly. A sudden burial, a calm basin, low oxygen that slowed decay. These moments are exceptions rather than rules. They captured brief glimpses, not continuous stories. The fossil record is made of pauses in destruction, not a steady archive. Because of this, we see only fragments. Shells, teeth, bones, and armor dominate what remains, giving the impression that ancient seas were ruled primarily by rigid forms. This skews perspective. It suggests strength and hardness as defaults, when in reality, they were strategies among many. The absence of soft life creates a false simplicity, making ecosystems appear less dynamic than they truly were. Entire lineages may have risen and vanished without leaving a single recognizable trace. Their existence is hinted at only through chemical signatures, disrupted patterns, or sudden changes in who survived. These lost forms shaped evolution nonetheless. They competed, fed, and altered environments in ways that influenced what followed. Their disappearance redirected pathways just as surely as any documented extinction. Even for creatures that did fossilize, much is missing. Behavior leaves little mark, color vanishes, movement disappears. Sound, light, and interaction fade entirely. A skeleton cannot show how an animal hunted, waited, communicated, or responded to its environment. It captures structure, not experience. The deeper the ocean, the less it records. Pressure, darkness, and constant movement erase evidence efficiently. Many deep-sea habitats that have existed for hundreds of millions of years remain unrepresented in stone. Their inhabitants lived, adapted, and vanished repeatedly, leaving behind almost nothing to suggest their presence. This absence matters. It reminds us that our understanding of Earth's history is built on partial information. What we know is shaped as much by what could survive time as by what actually lived. The story we tell is therefore incomplete by design. Yet within these gaps lies meaning. The missing record emphasizes resilience over permanence. Life does not need to be remembered to matter. It only needs to persist long enough to influence what comes next. The ocean's past is not fully written in rock, but carried forward through lineage, chemistry, and adaptation. We see only fragments, but even fragments reveal motion. They suggest a world far richer, stranger, and more crowded than stone alone can show. The spaces between fossils speak quietly of what once moved freely through water and left no mark behind. In that silence, the ocean keeps most of its secrets, reminding us that history is not only what remains, but also what time chose not to keep. The ancient ocean did not become dangerous because of any single creature. There was no solitary villain shaping its cruelty. The true nightmare emerged from the environment itself, from systems that demanded constant adjustment and punished hesitation. Life did not struggle against monsters. It struggled against conditions that shifted faster than bodies could comfortably adapt. No single creature caused it. Predators grew large and efficient, but they were responses, not origins. Armor thickened, speed increased, jaws widened, yet each of these traits followed pressures already in motion. Temperature changes altered metabolism. Chemistry reshaped where life could breathe. Currents redistributed food unevenly, leaving abundance in one place and emptiness in another. The environment set the terms, and life responded as best it could. The ocean became a place where balance rarely rested. Stability arrived briefly, then dissolved as new pressures emerged. Oxygen levels fluctuated, nutrients surged and retreated. Entire regions shifted between livable and hostile states. These changes did not announce themselves. They crept, accumulated, then crossed thresholds that transformed survival overnight. Within this system, extremes were not optional. The environment demanded them to endure scarcity. Some creatures slowed nearly to stillness, to survive predation. Others evolved relentless defenses or overwhelming force. To persist in darkness, senses sharpened beyond surface needs. Moderation offered little protection. The middle ground vanished as conditions favored those willing to trade comfort for capability. Survival required sacrifice at every level. Energy spent on growth could not be spent on reproduction. Armor increased protection but slowed movement. Speed improved escape but drained reserves quickly. Large bodies deterred predators but demanded constant feeding. Every advantage carried cost, and the environment offered no forgiveness for imbalance. Even reproduction reflected this pressure. Many lives were given so a few might continue. Care faded because care required resources few environments could sustain. Offspring entered hostile conditions with no guidance, shaped entirely by chance and alignment. The system did not reward intention, it rewarded persistence across time, even if most attempts failed. These sacrifices accumulated quietly. Lineages narrowed, diversity thinned in some eras, expanded in others. What survived did not do so because it was perfect, but because it fit the moment well enough. When conditions changed again, those same survivors often fell away, replaced by others better suited to the new demands. The nightmare, then, was not chaos, but requirement. The ocean did not seek destruction, it enforced limits through physics, chemistry, and time. Pressure crushed what could not yield. Darkness erased what depended on sight alone. Hunger removed what could not wait. Oxygen scarcity ended what could not slow. What made this environment so severe was its indifference. The sea did not react to effort or adaptation with mercy. It allowed success only as long as conditions permitted. When those conditions shifted, even the most refined strategies failed. Life learned not to expect fairness, only continuity. Yet, within this harsh system, endurance emerged. Sacrifice shaped resilience. The need to choose between competing demands, refined bodies, and behaviors. Over vast spans, life learned how to navigate extremes by becoming extreme in controlled ways. Excess was trimmed, inefficiency vanished. What remained could survive longer, not comfortably, but consistently. This environmental nightmare did not end. It softened in some eras and intensified in others. Even today, traces remain in deep water, polar seas, and unstable regions where conditions push limits again. The same rules apply, though the scale has changed. Understanding this reveals a quiet truth. The danger of ancient oceans was never about violence alone. It was about living inside a system that demanded constant compromise. Survival required giving something up, whether speed, safety, growth, or certainty. The ocean shaped life through pressure rather than intent. It asked for adaptation without promise of reward. Those that endured did so by aligning with demands rather than resisting them. In that alignment, the nightmare eased just enough for life to continue, not because the environment became kind, but because life learned how to survive within its unyielding embrace. Life endured the ancient oceans not because conditions were kind, but because giving up was never written into its nature. Across eras shaped by pressure, darkness, hunger, and collapse, persistence emerged as the most reliable response. Survival was not guaranteed by strength or dominance. It belonged to those able to change without losing continuity. Adaptability mattered most because the environment rarely stayed still. Temperature shifted gradually, then suddenly. Chemistry drifted, then crossed thresholds. Food arrived in pulses separated by long absences. In such a setting, rigid solutions failed quickly. Life learned to adjust its pace, its form, and its behavior without waiting for conditions to stabilize. This capacity to respond quietly, without spectacle, allowed continuity across enormous spans of time. Adaptation did not always mean improvement in the way it is commonly imagined. Often it meant simplification. Bodies shed unnecessary structures, behaviors narrowed to conserve energy, growth slowed, reproduction adjusted to uncertainty. Each change reduced vulnerability rather than increasing power. These shifts rarely produced dramatic advantages in the short term. They created steadiness over long durations. Flexibility beat power because power demanded maintenance. Large bodies required frequent feeding. Aggressive strategies consumed energy and attracted attention. Dominance created dependency on stability that never lasted. Flexible organisms accepted smaller gains in exchange for broader tolerance. They could endure scarcity, pressure, and darkness without relying on narrow conditions. This flexibility appeared in many forms. Some creatures altered where they lived, moving gradually into shallower or deeper zones as conditions shifted. Others changed how they fed, switching between prey, scavenging, or filtering based on availability. Metabolism slowed or accelerated when needed. Reproductive timing adjusted to brief windows of opportunity. None of these responses offered certainty. Together, they offered continuity. Endurance won not through resistance, but through patience. Many organisms survived not by defeating challenges, but by waiting them out. Extended periods of inactivity conserved energy when movement brought little benefit. Long lifespans allowed reproduction to occur when conditions aligned. Waiting became a strategy refined across millions of years. Even extinction events, which erased vast portions of life, did not end the story. Survivors rarely represented the most powerful or the most visible. They were often marginal forms already accustomed to scarcity and instability. These lineages carried forward traits shaped by restraint rather than expansion. When environments recovered, these survivors defined what came next. The ability to persist without progress defined much of ocean life. Evolution did not always move toward complexity. At times, it circled back to simplicity, refining what already worked rather than inventing novelty. Life continued not because it advanced endlessly, but because it retained the option to retreat, pause, and endure. This pattern extended beyond bodies into ecosystems. Communities reorganized themselves after disruption, shedding connections that no longer functioned and forming new ones slowly. Complexity returned cautiously, layered over resilience rather than excess. Systems built on adaptability absorbed shock more effectively than those optimized for peak performance. Life did not give up because it was never required to win in the moment. Survival did not demand control or dominance. It required continuity across changing conditions. This distinction allowed persistence where ambition might have failed. Across deep time, endurance proved stronger than success measured in any single era. Forms that thrived briefly but depended on narrow conditions vanished when change arrived. Those that endured quietly, often unnoticed, became the foundation for future diversity. Endurance did not offer visibility, it offered longevity. The ocean shaped this lesson gently, but relentlessly. It rewarded those who adjusted rather than resisted. It favored responses that conserved energy over displays of power. Through countless cycles of change, life learned how to continue without certainty. In this quiet persistence, life revealed its most enduring quality. It did not overcome the environment by force. It aligned with it just enough to remain present. Adaptability mattered most. Flexibility beat power. Endurance won, not through triumph, but through the patient decision to remain, moment by moment, as the world shifted around it. The ocean was not only the first home of life, it was the first test, quiet and relentless, shaping existence long before land offered refuge or variety. Within its depths, life encountered pressure as a constant presence, not an occasional challenge. Water pressed from all sides, chemistry shifted without warning, and energy arrived unevenly. From the beginning, survival required more than presence. It required endurance. Life was forged under pressure, in the most literal sense. Weight increased with depth, compressing bodies and narrowing options. Temperature varied subtly but persistently, guiding where organisms could exist and how quickly they could function. Currents moved nutrients and danger alike, connecting distant regions while isolating others. Nothing remained still long enough to allow comfort. The ocean demanded continual adjustment, even when change arrived slowly. Under these conditions, weakness was removed quickly, not through violence alone, but through incompatibility. Forms that relied on narrow conditions faded when chemistry shifted. Bodies that could not tolerate pressure failed as they descended or were pushed deeper. Strategies that required frequent feeding collapsed during scarcity. The environment did not wait for recovery. It filtered relentlessly, favoring alignment over effort. This filtering did not always act suddenly. Often it worked across generations, thinning populations gradually until a lineage vanished without notice. At other times, thresholds were crossed and loss came more quickly. In both cases, the result was the same. What remained fit the conditions not perfectly, but sufficiently. Survival did not reward excellence. It rewarded adequacy sustained over time. The ocean tested every aspect of life at once. Structure, behavior, metabolism, reproduction, and timing were all subject to pressure. No single trait ensured survival. Balance mattered more than strength. Bodies learned to yield rather than resist. Systems adapted to function under constant load. Life adjusted its rhythms to match scarcity rather than abundance. Those that endured carried these lessons forward. Survivors shaped everything that followed, not because they were superior in a single sense, but because they embodied combinations of traits that worked together. Flexibility paired with restraint, sensitivity balanced with patience, energy use aligned with availability. These qualities became foundations rather than temporary solutions. As evolution continued, new environments emerged, but they were never free of constraint. Land introduced gravity, exposure, and dryness. Air replaced water as the medium for movement and sensing. Yet the lessons learned in the ocean remained relevant. Endurance, efficiency, and adaptability continued to guide survival. The ocean's test had prepared life to face unfamiliar challenges without collapse. This early trial also shaped how ecosystems functioned. Interdependence developed where conditions allowed, while redundancy offered protection against loss. Food webs grew not through dominance alone, but through connections resilient enough to endure change. These patterns echoed far beyond the sea, influencing how life organized itself wherever it spread. The removal of weakness did not mean the creation of perfection. It meant the preservation of what could last. Traits that were costly or rigid disappeared over time. Those that allowed adjustment remained. This process gave life a quiet momentum, carrying it forward through instability rather than stopping it. The ocean did not provide comfort. It provided preparation. Life that passed its tests learned to persist without certainty, to exist without guarantees. It learned that continuity mattered more than success measured in short spans. These lessons accumulated across immense stretches of time, shaping the future before it arrived. In this way, the ocean stands as Earth's first proving ground. It did not select for ambition or speed alone. It favored forms that could remain functional while conditions changed around them. The survivors of this test became ancestors to all that followed, carrying forward strategies refined under pressure. Everything that later emerged, forests, animals, complex societies, traces its origins back to this trial. The ocean did not simply host life, it trained it. Through pressure, removal, and persistence, it shaped a lineage capable of enduring change itself. The story of life that followed cannot be separated from this beginning, where survival was quiet, constant, and earned through alignment with a demanding world. The prehistoric sea was not cruel. Cruelty requires intention, and the ocean had none. It did not watch, judge, or choose. It existed, vast and unmoved, following rules older than any life within it. Water carried pressure, chemistry followed balance, energy flowed where physics allowed, nothing more was required. Indifference shaped everything. The sea did not reward effort or punish failure. It responded only to alignment. Those who fit its conditions persisted. Those who did not faded quietly, without ceremony or memory. Survival was never personal. It was mechanical, guided by forces that never paused to consider what was lost. These simple rules were consistent. Pressure increased with depth. Light disappeared beyond reach. Oxygen drifted in and out of availability. Food arrived unevenly, sometimes in abundance, often not at all. Movement consumed energy. Stillness conserved it. Bodies that resisted these truths broke. Bodies that yielded endured longer. Life paid the price for surviving them, not all at once, but continually. Every adaptation carried cost. Armor offered protection, but slowed movement. Speed allowed escape, but drained reserves. Size deterred rivals, but demanded constant fuel. Reproduction promised continuity, but sacrificed most beginnings to chance. Nothing was gained without something being lost. The ocean did not negotiate these costs. It enforced them equally, across all depths and eras. Even success was temporary, dependent on conditions holding long enough to matter. When those conditions shifted, survival required adjustment or disappearance. There was no fairness in this exchange, only consistency. Over immense time, this indifference sculpted a living world shaped by restraint. Excess vanished. Inefficiency faded. What remained was not optimized for comfort or ease, but for persistence. Life learned how to exist within limits, how to continue without certainty, how to endure without guarantees. The result was not harmony, but balance maintained through constant filtering. Diversity appeared and vanished repeatedly. Ecosystems formed, unraveled, then formed again in new arrangements. Each cycle carried forward what had proven workable, not because it was best, but because it was compatible. The sea never cared whether life suffered or thrived. It only cared, in its unthinking way, that rules were followed. Pressure did not soften for fragile bodies. Darkness did not retreat for hopeful eyes. Scarcity did not ease for hunger. Life survived by accepting this reality, not by challenging it. In accepting it, life changed itself. It became quieter, slower, more patient. Strategies built around waiting replaced those built around force. Sensitivity replaced speed. Endurance replaced ambition. These were not moral lessons. They were outcomes of physics applied without exception. What endured into the present is shaped by this long trial. Modern oceans feel calmer in many places, but the underlying rules remain unchanged. Pressure still presses, chemistry still shifts, energy still flows unevenly. The apparent gentleness of today's seas rests on long periods of stability, not on altered principles. This history does not diminish the value of life, it explains its shape. The forms we see now, on land and in water, carry the imprint of surviving an indifferent world. They are not products of kindness, they are outcomes of persistence. The prehistoric sea was not an enemy, it was not a guardian. It was a setting governed by simple truths that never bent. Life did not conquer it. Life learned how to exist within it long enough to continue elsewhere. In that sense, survival itself was the price. Every living thing carries echoes of what was endured, what was given up, and what remained possible. The ocean never cared, and that indifference shaped everything that followed. The story of life does not end with comfort or safety. It continues because adaptation did not stop, because endurance outlasted collapse, because persistence found a way to move forward without expectation of reward. In the quiet aftermath of that ancient world, one truth remains steady. Life survived not because the ocean was kind, but because it was consistent. And in learning how to live within that consistency, life paid the price, again and again, simply to keep going.